Hi there. Now, I'm not a huge fan of redirect tests. Maintaining data integrity in those things can be a real mission. And when I say redirect tests, what I'm talking about is specifically client-side redirect tests. Server-side redirect tests, they're fine. And when I'm talking about redirect tests, what I'm talking about is where you have an original URL or page that people visit, and you want some of the traffic to be redirected to a different page. And when we talk about redirect tests, whether or not you're doing them client side or server side, the mechanics are usually the same, wherein you have a regular expression that you write to match to a specific URL, to original URL, and then you rewrite that URL to point to a different URL. And the problem with this is that regular expressions can be rather brittle, because if you have a typo here or a URL scope mismatch, or you miss an edge case, this can lead to some really damaging impacts on your traffic, because these tests are working on a routing level, on a URL matching level. So they're applying pretty much everywhere. And it's because of this that I like to have a very strict process to create these kind of regular expressions, and also to QA these kind of regular expressions. And having these strict process means that it's perfect for automation, which is what I've done with this n8n workflow. You can download this workflow in a link below, and you can just go ahead and use it. But for the rest of the article, I'm just going to take you for a tour of this n8n workflow and show you how it works, and so you get an idea about how you can customize it, which you really should. So yeah, let's get to it. All right, so here's the workflow. This part is green and this part is red. This part is red because this is part you probably want to change. If you're not using Convert, you probably want to do other stuff after the regular expression has been created, which is what this green stuff is all about. So it's going to step one, which is to force the required information. So this one, there's some key information that the entire workflow needs. This is the target URL, so which page you want to change. We want to redirect from your original URL page. And then the change request, just some text information in plain English, description of the change. It'll work with any language, by the way. And then sitemap, and just put a link to the sitemap. If you don't have a sitemap, stop this now and sort that out. Otherwise, you probably want to swap this out to have a list of URLs that is relevant for your site. And I'm using a form just to sort of force these requirements in the simplest way, but you could take an input in different ways if you want. And then the next step, all that's doing is just basically taking out the key URLs and having that available in a nice way, so then it can be used by subsequent steps. The get sitemap does exactly what you think it does. It takes a URL of the sitemap and it fetches the entire sitemap, and then this converts that sitemap into a nicely formatted list of URLs. And then after that, it goes over to scope URL list. And this is an important step, and I'll show you the regular expression for this. What this is doing is it takes the list of sitemaps, and then based on the change request, it sort of figures out like what are the target URLs, what are the scope of the URLs that the change request is trying to get at. And you might want to put in a human in the loop after this. I'll leave that to your discretion. But what this will output is basically say for each of those URLs, what's in scope, what's not in scope for the test based on your change request. And it seems to do a pretty good job in my testing, even when not very clear. And then the next thing is a URL scope check. So this kind of writes the format. So basically, based on the AI generated result for the list of URLs are in scope. It just goes back through that entire list of URLs and then it just applies, this is in scope, this is not in scope. And then I'll get to merge in a bit, but then this is the key part that writes the regular expression. And you'll notice that this and the previous step, I'm using the convention of explaining what the tool does at the top as a prompt, and then adding some patterns, input output patterns. So take a list of URL, the change request, the target URL change request, and then output a regular expression. And this kind of forces the format a little bit and then establishes a pattern. Both of these parts, by the way, using small models, so very, very efficient. After that, this is the key step where after it's written the regular expression, it goes through some regex validator. So this script, what it does is it goes through for every single URL in your sitemap. It just goes and checks whether or not it is in scope, whether it's applied by the regular expression or whether it's not applied. And so it just does some basic QA based on the scope, based on the regular expression that's come back. And then this just formats the error. So if there's an error, then it goes back towards a merge. In previous versions, I did have this entire validation rather as a tool for this regex writer, and then said always use this tool. But I wanted to be explicit the fact that the workflow always needs to run this validator. And the best way to do that is to have it as the next step. So after every single time that it writes some regex, it should go through this QA process. And if it comes out, if there's an error for whatever reason, that data gets merged in, and then the error is now available in regex writer to be available to use. It creates the experiment name. This is a way to get all of the experiment name, by the way. Then final output is just setting the variables that I need for the subsequent steps, including account ID, project ID. And then the next steps just creates the experiment in Convert. So there's three requests that basically need to be made. One for creating the experience, one for the AI fetches the necessary IDs to then create the variation and then enables a regular expression. So that's it. Let's execute this workflow so you can see how it works. Okay, so I've triggered the form to start, and then I'm just testing this. And then the target URL is apps page, and I've just said just to redirect to apps2. Page doesn't exist at the moment. That's fine for this purpose. And then the sitemap is copied that URL. That's the URL to my sitemap, and then submit. Great. Now we can see it run. Let's run through all of these steps, and it's created the experiment. So if we head on over to our dashboard, there it's created. And let's just see what it's created. Yep, it's created some regular expression and then the URL pattern. So then it's just up to me to validate that this also works. And as you can see from this workflow, the whole process runs very quick, very cheap as well. It's using minimal number of tokens and it's very efficient. We're only making the posts, the API calls that we need to create the experiments, and we're only making the minimum number of AI calls that we need to generate the key sort of decision points along the way, like writing the regular expression. I want to just point out that none of this precludes you from doing some QA yourself. In fact, what I envisage you doing is to have a step after this workflow where you create a nice set of documentation for the human QA to follow, and thereby just really make sure that this is rock solid. I just want to reiterate, my point here is not to give you a workflow that you can then plug in and use. Rather, it is to give you some ideas about the kinds of things that you can build workflows around, and also give you a starting point from which to customize and create your own workflow. So thanks for sitting through this whole thing and making it this far. Hopefully see you next time.